Hi everybody, I'm Stockton Helbing, and I'm here to speak to you a little bit about the approach we take with our non-jazz studies majors on the drum set when learning how to play Bossa Nova. The Bossa Nova is a wonderful groove that comes out of South America and was popularized in the 1960s by several great artists, most in particular the great Antonio Carlos Jobim, who wrote many famous Bossa Nova songs that you might know, like The Girl from Ipanema or Corcovado. Those are some great hits from him. You might want to check those out so that you have an oral reference to what we're studying. What we're going to be doing is using my book, Studies in Syncopation, to get the basics together for how we can approach playing the Bossa Nova at the drum set. Whenever we play a Latin style at the drum set, it is important that we all remember that we are emulating a percussion section. You really want to make sure you're following the basic approaches of each percussion instrument that is indigenous to that Latin style of music that you are studying. And I say that because when playing Bossa Nova, one of the common things I observe is that drummers play far too loudly. This is a smooth, cool, delicate style, and it requires that we have a sensitive, thoughtful, gentle approach to the drums when striking them. If you'll open up your copy of Studies in Syncopation to page 14, you'll see at the bottom I have several basic feet patterns that we can use when studying this book and when studying Bossa Nova style. We're going to be looking at example 3 today, and I recommend examples 3 and 4 for all of you to practice to learn to be adaptable to whatever your musical situation may require of you. As we look at this, we can see that there are 2 elements. There's a reoccurring pattern of the bass drum of playing on beats 1, the and of 2, beat 3, and the and of 4. 1 and 3 and 1. And 3, and 1. And then we see that the hi-hat is playing in a reoccurring role of 2 and 4. 2, 4, 2, 4. Let's examine each of these different instruments and the feet patterns that they're playing. Starting with the bass drum, the technique we want to use is very similar to the technique that I discussed when studying how to play the John Pratt book with bass drum and hi-hat. We want to play with the heel of our foot relaxed, resting on the bottom portion of the bass drum pedal. And when we desire a stroke, we're going to gently push on the ball of our foot to get a nice mezzo piano stroke. You want to make sure you're controlling the rebound so that the beater doesn't fly far too back and inadvertently cause you to have too loud of a stroke on subsequent hits. You want to have a nice relaxed leg positioning, gentle downslope. Make sure you're sitting up tall on your drum throne, chest up tall and proud, and you're sitting square to the bass drum. Now let's talk about the role of the hi-hat in this basic feet pattern for Bossa Nova. The hi-hat is going to be playing on beats 2 and 4, so we are going to use a nice heel-toe stroke, rocking that foot to accomplish that. This means that on beats 1 and 3, we are back resting the full weight of our leg on the heel of our foot on the bottom of the pedal board. And then for each stroke on 2 and 4, we're going to gently roll forward to the ball of our foot. Our heel will be elevated. This should cause a nice, smooth, and consistent pattern of motion in our left foot. And remember, we don't want to have too wide of a stance in our legs. That will help our posture and the comfortability, especially in our hip flexors. We want to make sure we're sitting up nice, tall, and proud. When both feet are playing this pattern together, one of the helpful things that you can use to ensure that you're playing accurately and with a good metronomic time feel is that on beat 1 and beat 3 of every measure, you have a simultaneous stroke of your left foot heel striking the bottom of your pedal board and your bass drum playing a quarter note. That is a great aligned idea that you can seek out mentally when practicing. I call those vertical alignments because if we were writing this out in a notation style, you would see the stems align. If you look at example 3 in my book on page 14, you'll see that the stems of those notes on beats 1 and 3 are aligned. You can use that as a mental checkpoint to ensure you're playing your pattern correctly. Now that we have our basic feet pattern together, let's talk about getting the snare drum involved in what we're going to do. What I like to do before I even worry about playing the etude number 1 in the Studies in Syncopation text, I like to make sure that I'm just prepared with the basics. So what you will want to do is to get your feet pattern going and play some very basic snare drum warm-up concepts. Always start with getting your feet pattern going for a couple measures first. I'm going to play 2 measures of just my feet, and then I'm simply going to play some alternating quarter notes at a mezzo forte volume on my snare drum to try to get my hands accustomed to working with my feet. 1, 2, feet only. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, here's the snare. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That might be too fast for some of you. Remember that we will never play something quickly and accurately, that we cannot first play slowly and accurately. So if you're struggling, the first thing you should do is slow it down. Obviously, make sure you have a metronome handy so you can track your progress in either direction of tempo. I'm going to slow that same exercise down, and I'm going to simplify. I'm going to play 1 measure of just right-hand quarter notes, and then 1 measure of left-hand quarter notes and repeat, so I can really focus on each of those hands first. I'm going to always start with my feet only. 1, 2, here are my feet. 1, 2, here are the hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once that feels more comfortable, I can reintroduce alternating. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. I might do left hand lead. 1, 2, left, right, left, right, left, right. Practice things that help give you confidence in your control, both physically with your coordination and dynamically, making sure that you're not playing too loudly. It's a simple thing, but always remember to listen to how you sound. If it is not a pleasing sound to you, it will not be a pleasing sound to others. It's so simple, yet I myself am guilty of not listening to the sounds I'm creating, especially when I'm working on new complicated concepts. So remember to listen to what's going on around you. These snare drum warm-ups are all to help prepare you for the written etude in the Studies in Syncopation text. Etude number 1 on page 19 is the first requirement we have of students to play. And eventually, at the end of the semester, we desire our students to be able to do it with a play-along that we use from Jim Riley's Survival Guide for the Modern Drummer book. His Bossa Nova track that we have students demonstrate this skill with is at the tempo of quarter note equals 130 beats per minute. That is the goal. You do not want to start there. You want to work your way up. Imagine if your goal is to be able to bench press 400 pounds. You're not going to try to bench 400 pounds to start. You're going to work your way up and build strength. We need to build strength, endurance, and understanding of what we're doing slowly. So remember to set a goal and then slowly but progressively work towards that goal. So before you're ready to tackle full-on comping in a Bossa Nova style, I recommend that you are able to play the etude, which is syncopated, hence the title of the book, Studies in Syncopation. Be able to play it with nice natural sticking in a relaxed manner on the snare drum while maintaining your Bossa Nova feet pattern. We're using foot pattern number 3 from that earlier example I showed you. What I'm going to do is play the first 4 measures of etude number 1 at a nice slow tempo. And I recommend everyone do this to learn not only to read the rhythms correctly in a syncopated style, but to play them and voice them on the surface of the snare drum while maintaining excellence in your feet. As always, I recommend that you start with several measures of just the feet pattern. I'll start with 2 bars of that at a nice slow tempo. 1, 2, here's the feet. 1, etude, 2, here we go. That is harder than it looks, I know, and some of you might be at home trying this and getting really frustrated with it. Don't worry. Whenever you're struggling, slow it down, simplify. You might want to take it measure by measure. You might, first and foremost, just be struggling with the syncopated nature of the writing. You might want to just practice the snare drum portion by itself. So take your time, Build it slowly. Take it measure by measure, phrase by phrase, and eventually, as is our goal by the end of the semester, you'll be able to play the entire etude all the way down. There are several different ride cymbal patterns that we ask students to be prepared to demonstrate to us by the end of their first semester of drum set study. You will find these examples on page 16 in Studies in Syncopation. The ones that we're going to primarily focus on are 1 through 4, with examples 5 and 6 being some extra credit for you overachievers. We're going to start simply with ride pattern number 1. This is the first ride pattern that I recommend everyone work with. When we're playing the ride cymbal, there's a couple important things to remember. We're going to achieve a good ride cymbal sound in this Bossa Nova style by making sure we're striking the ride cymbal with the tip of the stick roughly midway between the center of the cymbal and the edge. Common problems that I observe is that students like to try to play far down the cymbal close to the edge. This gives us a very washy sound, and we lose the distinction of the placement of time, which that tip attack gives us. So when we're playing quarter notes, as in example number 1, we want to make sure we're about halfway up the cymbal. Every cymbal is a little bit different. You just want to make sure you're listening to what you're doing and adjusting accordingly. You can hear that it really gets washy as you get to the edge of the cymbal, and it gets thin and pingy as you approach the bell. So make sure you're striking in a proper area for a great sound. Something that can be very helpful is to take a dry erase marker and simply write a small target on your cymbal to help give you a visual aid when practicing. After you're confident that you're playing with a good technique on the ride cymbal, I recommend practicing the ride cymbal, bass drum, and hi-hat together to make sure that those 3 voices sound good together, both rhythmically with accuracy of each part, including alignment of each part inside of each other, as well as dynamically. Don't forget, if it's not a pleasing sound to you, it will not be pleasing to others. You might want to give your feet a couple bars head start before you introduce this first ride pattern of quarter notes. 2, here's the ride. You'll notice that my left hand is staying in a nice playing position the whole time. This is very important. You want to train your left hand to always be ready for action. Your left hand will also act as a counterweight, helping balance your upper body. So train your left hand to stay there, even though it's not currently in use. We are always going to want to have it there so that it's ready to be used whenever we need it. Now we're ready to put all 4 voices together: the bass drum, the hi-hat, the ride cymbal, and the snare drum. Again, I recommend taking some warm-ups before approaching the etude so that you can build on confidence and success rather than confusion and frustration. All I'm going to do is practice playing quarter notes on my left hand by playing 1 measure of ride cymbal, bass drum, and hi-hat, and then 1 measure adding the snare drum. And I'll repeat that a couple times. These are the first steps of me understanding what the Bossa Nova style is going to require of all 4 limbs. As always, I'm going to start with my feet first. 1, 2, just the feet. Now the ride cymbal, ready, and 1, 2, and the snare. There are a lot of warm-ups that you can do before approaching the etude that I think will help you a lot. Some real basic 8th note patterns or quarter note patterns in the left hand. I like to do permutation studies, for instance, with just 1 quarter note, where it's on beat 1 for 1 measure, then beat 2 on the next, then beat 3. You can do the same thing with 8th notes. Find ways to help you have a clear understanding of what you're doing. You should be able to clearly think about what you're doing in this approach to playing Bossa Nova while you're doing it. You do not ever want to be purely relying on instincts or hope. This should be a mental process that you're carrying out, which means you might need to slow that tempo down. Remember that good musicians are good thinkers, and the best musicians are the fastest thinkers. You have to practice thinking when you're doing this. This brings us to the final product. So what you're going to have is a ride cymbal pattern, a bass drum pattern, a hi-hat pattern, and then the snare drum reading the etude. I recommend to everyone you start by playing all of the etude on the open snare drum with the left hand. After you can do that well, you can then move to playing the side stick pattern. But always start just with the open snare, and remember to have a great overall balanced sound around mezzo piano where you can hear each voice clearly and easily. Always start with the feet. What I'm going to do is give myself 2 measures of feet only. Then I'm going to introduce the first cymbal pattern, quarter notes only for 2 measures. And then I'm going to play the first 4 measures of etude number 1 at a nice slow pace. 1, 2, just the feet. Now my right cymbal for 2 measures. And now the first 4 measures of the etude. As you get more comfortable with the total exercise, you will then want to introduce a side stick articulation on the snare drum rather than the open sound. A lot of people get very confused with the actual technique of playing a side stick. What you're going to want to do, and what is common to do, is to flip the stick over so that we're using the butt of the stick for contact with the rim of the snare drum. You can use this side of it, but if you're striking the rim above the taper, it'll give you a very thin sound. I like to have a nice, full, rich sound, which means I'm going to use the butt of the stick. I'm going to rest my left hand, since I'm a right-handed player. I'm resting my left hand on the snare drum. If you're looking at your snare drum as a clock, I'm resting my hand around the 7 or 8 o'clock position, close to the rim. I'm also going to place the tip of my stick on the head. The palm muting aspect of the placement of your left hand is a very important part of producing a great side stick sound, it's hard to say, in a bossa nova style. And then when I want to stroke, I'm going to bring the butt of the stick into contact with the rim. It's a bit strange because we're used to letting sticks rebound when we strike drums. For a good side stick sound, it is proper to leave the stick into the rim at least for a split second to get a nice full sound. Some common issues I will find is that when people are playing, they are not palm muting, and so they're picking the whole hand up, and that gives a very thin, anemic, and ringy sound. Or another issue could be that you're too far up with your palm placement, which really changes the sound. You always want to be listening to what you're doing, making sure that side stick is a nice, pleasing sound, and experiment and find what works best for you. One thing to keep an eye out for too is the angle of your snare drum. By and large, I like the butt of my stick to strike the snare drum around the 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock position. You don't want to get over to the 3 o'clock position. That can be awkward and change the sound. And you don't want to be too far up. You might come into contact with your rack tom, or it causes some very uncomfortable and potentially hazardous positionings of your arm. So you want that nice side stick sound that when you introduce it into the entire exercise, you get a very classic bossa nova sound. Here's an example. 1, 2, here we go. I hope that this video has given you some helpful tips and hints on how you can get started enjoying the wonderful, beautiful music known as bossa nova. The most important thing you can do to learn about any style of music, just like bossa nova, is to listen to it. Music, the drum set, is an oral tradition first and foremost, so make sure you're listening to it. I find that most students who are struggling with playing this style of music have no idea what it sounds like. You would never leave for vacation without knowing your destination. And you should never leave for learning how to play a new style of music at the drum set without listening to it before, during, and after you're studying it. My personal favorite bossa nova album to go to is the great Getz and Gilberto record recorded in the 60s that features Antonio Carlos Jobim on piano and guitar on several different tracks. It's an absolute classic. That's where the classic recording of The Girl from Ipanema comes from. That's a great starting point. Go to that, and that will leave you on a beautiful journey of this music called Bossa Nova. And remember that these basic exercises we're talking about are not the pinnacle and end of this music. These are the baby steps, your first steps to enjoying this beautiful music at the drum set. I hope it helps, and I'll see you soon for another video.